I never expected to feel this way about her, especially not in the middle of the night. But as I turned from the refrigerator, the dim light casting eerie shadows, she stood there. My stepmom. Her eyes locked onto mine, a strange mix of hesitation and determination. "We need to talk," she whispered, her voice trembling. The air between us was thick, and for the first time, I felt like everything I thought I knew was about to change forever. Life in our house was always routine. My dad, a creature of habit, woke up every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, coffee brewing while the house still slumbered. My stepmom, Emma, was the perfect complement to him, organized, calm, and always polite. She came into our lives when I was 12, 2 years after my mom passed away. At first, I resented her, not because she did anything wrong, but because she wasn't my mom. Over time, we grew into a quiet coexistence, though I wouldn't say we were close. She respected my space, and I respected hers. Emma wasn't the type to break rules or routines. She had a strict bedtime at 10 p.m. and always rose early to start her day. The image of her sneaking into the kitchen late at night was entirely out of character. That's why her presence, illuminated by the refrigerator light, felt so unnerving. It was as though she had stepped out of her carefully crafted role, and for the first time, I saw her not as the perfect wife or stepmom, but as a person with secrets. Growing up, our house was a place of structure, but not warmth. Dad worked hard to provide for us, but emotional conversations weren't his strong suit. Emma did her best to fill in the gaps, but her efforts felt more like duty than genuine connection. There were no screaming fights or overt tensions, just an invisible wall that separated us from being truly close. Despite the distance, Emma had always been there in the background, helping with school projects, remembering birthdays, and making sure the house ran like clockwork. I thought I understood her, that she was just a well-meaning but detached figure in my life. But the way she looked at me that night, with hesitation in her eyes and words she couldn't quite bring herself to say, made me question everything. There was a vulnerability in her I hadn't noticed before, and it made me wonder what she was hiding. What could possibly be so important that she'd break her routine and risk being caught? As I stood there, staring at her in the dim light, I couldn't shake the feeling that my world was about to change in ways I couldn't imagine. The encounter that night left me restless. Emma's nervous glances, the weight in her voice, it all gnawed at me. For years, she'd been composed, almost too perfect. Now, for the first time, there was a crack in her facade, and I couldn't ignore it. The following day, I found myself watching her closely, trying to piece together what might be going on. At breakfast, she was her usual self, calm, polite, and quietly attentive to my dad. But there was something different. Her smile seemed forced, and she avoided eye contact with me. When I asked her about her plans for the day, she hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. It was subtle, but now that I was looking for it, it felt glaring. Then there was the phone. Normally, Emma was the type to leave her phone lying around, always face up on the counter or the coffee table. But now it never left her side. She'd glance at it frequently, her expression hard to read. Once I caught her scrolling through her messages, her brows furrowed in concentration. When she realized I was watching, she quickly put the phone away, offering a tight smile. "Just work stuff," she said. But her voice was tight, almost defensive. As the days passed, the tension grew. I noticed little things that I'd never paid attention to before. She seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere. She'd forget small details like turning off the stove or where she'd left her keys. One afternoon, while cleaning up the living room, I found a crumpled piece of paper tucked under the couch cushion. It was a receipt for a coffee shop downtown, dated late at night, long after she should have been home. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of it. Who was she meeting, and why hadn't she mentioned it? That evening, my dad was late coming home, caught up at the office. Emma spent most of the night on edge, glancing out the window and pacing the kitchen. When I asked if everything was okay, she waved me off. "Just a long day," she murmured, but her tone was far from convincing. Later that night, unable to sleep, I made my way downstairs again. The house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the wall clock. As I reached the bottom step, I saw the faint glow of the kitchen light spilling into the hallway. My heart pounded as I approached. Emma was there, sitting at the table with her phone in hand. Her face was illuminated by the screen, and she looked tense. She didn't notice me at first, so I stayed hidden, peering around the corner. She typed something quickly, then paused, her fingers hovering over the keys as if she were unsure of what to say next. Finally, she hit send, exhaling deeply as she set the phone down. I debated confronting her right then and there, but I couldn't bring myself to step into the light. Instead, I crept back upstairs, my mind racing with questions. Who was she texting so late at night? And why did she look so anxious? The next day, I tried to shake the thoughts, but they clung to me like a shadow. Emma's behavior only added fuel to the fire. She was avoiding me, that much was clear. Whenever I entered the room, she found a reason to leave. Whenever I asked her a question, she gave short, curt answers. The distance between us, which had always been there, now felt insurmountable. I couldn't help but wonder if she was hiding something from my dad, too. Was this about their relationship? Or was it something else entirely? The pieces didn't fit, but the picture they painted was unsettling. And the more I thought about it, the more determined I became to find out the truth. I told myself I was overthinking it, that Emma's late-night moments and distant behavior were nothing more than stress or exhaustion. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore the tension that had crept into our home. It was subtle at first, like a faint buzz in the background, but it grew louder with every passing day. And then one night it happened again. I had stayed up late, pretending to be immersed in a movie in the living room, but my focus was elsewhere. I waited, listening for the faint creak of footsteps on the stairs, the soft rustle of movement in the kitchen. Hours passed, and I started to think it was all in my head. Maybe she wasn't hiding anything. Maybe I was the one looking for something that wasn't there. And then I heard it, the familiar creak of the staircase. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned off the TV and slipped into the shadows. Emma moved quietly, her steps careful, as if she didn't want to wake anyone. She passed by the living room without noticing me, her figure illuminated by the faint moonlight streaming through the windows. I followed her, my breath shallow, my nerves on edge. When I reached the kitchen, she was standing by the counter, her back to me. The light from her phone cast a glow over her face, and she looked worried, her brows furrowed in concentration. This time, she wasn't making tea or looking for a snack. She was staring at her screen, her fingers trembling as she typed. I stepped forward, and the floor creaked beneath my weight. She spun around, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick, charged with something I couldn't quite define. Her phone buzzed in her hand, but she didn't look at it. Instead, her gaze locked onto mine, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't noticed before. Fear, vulnerability, and something else, something I couldn't place. "What are you doing up?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shrugged, trying to appear casual even though my heart was pounding. "Couldn't sleep." "What about you?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her phone. "Just needed some air." Her answer didn't sit right with me. "At 2 a.m? Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she looked away, her gaze flickering to the window. "Sometimes it's hard to turn off your thoughts," she murmured, more to herself than to me. I stepped closer, my curiosity getting the better of me. "What's on your mind?" She froze, her shoulders stiffening. "It's nothing you need to worry about." But I did worry. I couldn't help it. There was something in the way she avoided my eyes, in the way she clutched her phone like it held all her secrets. I reached out, my hand brushing against hers as I gestured toward the device. "Is it about Dad?" Her reaction was instant. She pulled her hand back as if my touch had burned her. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "It's not about him." "Then what is it?" I pressed, my frustration boiling over. "You've been acting strange for days, sneaking around, avoiding me. Just tell me what's going on." Her eyes darted to the doorway, as if she were debating whether to run. But instead of fleeing, she took a deep breath and met my gaze. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me," I said, my voice firm. For a moment, she seemed to consider it. Her eyes softened, and her grip on her phone loosened. But then she shook her head, turning away from me. "It's complicated," she whispered, the words heavy with meaning. I couldn't let it go. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us. "Emma, whatever it is, you can trust me." She turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw tears in her eyes. "It's not that simple," she said, her voice trembling. "There are things you don't know, things I've kept to myself because I thought it was better that way." Her words sent a chill down my spine. What could she possibly mean? What was so important that she couldn't tell me, or my dad? Before I could ask, the faint buzz of her phone interrupted the moment. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting from vulnerability to something unreadable. She quickly locked the screen and slipped the phone into her pocket. "We shouldn't be having this conversation," she said, her voice steadier now. "Not like this." And just like that, the moment was over. She brushed past me, leaving me alone in the kitchen, my mind racing with possibilities. Whatever she was hiding, it wasn't small. It wasn't insignificant. And it wasn't over. The next few days passed in a blur of unanswered questions and growing unease. Emma avoided me at every opportunity, her movements quick and deliberate, as though she feared any moment alone with me might unravel the fragile balance she was trying to maintain. I watched her carefully, every word she spoke and every glance she exchanged with my dad taking on new significance. Something was wrong, and I was determined to find out what. It wasn't until a quiet Saturday afternoon that everything came to a head. My dad had left for a meeting, and the house was still. Emma sat in the living room, her phone in hand, scrolling through messages. She didn't notice me standing in the doorway at first, and I used the moment to observe her. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her shoulders tense, and her gaze kept darting to the window, as if she were waiting for something, or someone. Finally, I cleared my throat, and she looked up, startled. "Oh," she said, her voice shaky. "I didn't hear you there." I stepped into the room, my heart pounding. "We need to talk." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her phone. "Now's not a good time." "It's never a good time," I shot back, frustration lacing my voice. "You've been acting strange for weeks. I know something's going on, and I'm not going to let this go." For a moment she said nothing, her eyes searching mine as though weighing her options. Finally, she sighed and set her phone down on the coffee table. "You're right," she said quietly. "There is something I need to tell you." I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. She gestured for me to sit down, and I complied, my mind racing with possibilities. "Before I say anything," she began, "I need you to understand that I never wanted things to happen this way. I thought I was doing the right thing by keeping it to myself." I frowned, my anxiety mounting. "What are you talking about?" She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted us. Her expression shifted to one of panic. "He's home," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll have to finish this later." "No," I said firmly, standing up. "We're not putting this off again." The front door opened, and my dad's voice echoed through the hallway. "Emma, are you here?" Her eyes widened, and she looked at me pleadingly. "Please," she said. "Don't say anything." But I couldn't stay silent any longer. The weight of her secrets was too much to bear. As my dad entered the room, his cheerful demeanor faltered when he saw us. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his gaze shifting between us. I hesitated, unsure of how to begin. But before I could speak, Emma stepped forward. "Everything's fine," she said quickly. "Just a minor misunderstanding." I shook my head. "No, it's not fine. Emma's been acting strange for weeks, sneaking around and keeping secrets. She needs to tell us what's going on." My dad's brow furrowed, and he turned to Emma. "Is that true?" She looked cornered, her eyes darting between us. Finally, she sighed and reached for her phone. "You're right," she said quietly. "I owe you both an explanation." She unlocked her phone and handed it to my dad. As he scrolled through the messages, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low. "It's about the house," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been trying to refinance the loan. I didn't want to worry you, so I've been handling it on my own." I blinked, taken aback. "That's what this is about." "A loan?" Her eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of guilt. "Partly," she admitted. "But there's more." Before she could elaborate, her phone buzzed with a new message. She snatched it from my dad's hand, her expression shifting to one of dread. I stepped closer, peering over her shoulder. The message was brief but chilling. "You need to tell him the truth. He deserves to know." "Who's that from?" I asked, my voice sharp. She hesitated, her hands trembling. "It's complicated," she said finally. "No more complications," I snapped. "Just tell us the truth." She let out a shaky breath and looked at my dad, then at me. "It's about your mom," she said, her voice barely audible. My heart skipped a beat. "My mom?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded. "Before she passed, she left something for you, a letter. She made me promise not to give it to you until she thought you were ready." 1,000 questions raced through my mind. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I didn't know how," she admitted. "I was afraid it would reopen old wounds." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and yellowed with age. "I've been carrying it with me, waiting for the right moment." My hands shook as I took the letter. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint rustle of paper as I unfolded it. My mom's handwriting was unmistakable, and as I read her words, a wave of emotion crashed over me. She spoke of her love for me, her hopes and dreams, and the strength she believed I had to face life's challenges. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred my vision. I looked up at Emma, my emotions a whirlwind of gratitude and anger. "Why didn't you trust me with this?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. She reached out hesitantly, and I surprised myself by taking her hand. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting you." In that moment, the weight of the secrets and tension lifted. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step toward healing. The revelation of the letter brought a fragile sense of clarity to the chaos that had been brewing for weeks. For a brief moment, everything felt raw and exposed, but the air between us seemed lighter. My dad, who had been silent for most of the confrontation, finally spoke. "Emma," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" She turned to him, her expression a mixture of guilt and vulnerability. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said quietly. "Your wife trusted me with something precious, and I didn't want to betray that trust. But I see now that I should have told you both. I'm sorry." My dad nodded slowly, his jaw tight as he processed her words. "I understand," he said finally, though his tone suggested he was still grappling with the weight of everything. "But secrets like this don't protect anyone. They only make things harder." Emma looked down, her shoulders slumping. "I know," she whispered. "And I'm sorry." I sat there, the letter still clutched in my hands, my emotions swirling. Anger, sadness, relief, they all fought for dominance. My mom's words echoed in my mind, her love and belief in me cutting through the tension like a bomb. But there was still a part of me that felt betrayed. How could Emma have kept something so important from me for so long? The days that followed were tense. My dad and Emma's relationship seemed strained, their conversations short and tinged with unspoken words. I couldn't help but notice how he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression a mix of hurt and confusion. As for me, I struggled to reconcile the image of Emma I had known with the person who had kept such a monumental secret. One evening, as I sat in my room rereading the letter, there was a knock on my door. Emma stood in the doorway, her face hesitant but determined. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I nodded, folding the letter and setting it aside. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. For a moment she stood there as if gathering her thoughts. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know I've hurt you," she began, her voice trembling. "And I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I want you to understand that everything I did was out of love. For you and for your mom." I looked at her, the anger in my chest simmering down to a dull ache. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice low. "Didn't you think I deserved to know?" She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "You did, and I see that now. But at the time, I thought I was doing what was best. Your mom made me promise to wait until you were ready, and I convinced myself that waiting was the right thing to do. But you decided for me," I said, my voice firmer. "That wasn't your choice to make." She flinched at my words, her tears spilling over. "You're right," she admitted. "I was wrong to keep it from you. I see that now, and I'm so sorry." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence hung heavy in the air, filled with unspoken words and lingering emotions. Finally, I let out a sigh. "I'm still angry," I said honestly. "But I believe you meant well." Her lips trembled as she nodded. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the house began to ease. My dad and Emma worked through their issues, their conversations growing longer and more heartfelt. I noticed them sitting together late at night, talking in hushed tones, their hands intertwined. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As for me, I found myself opening up to Emma in ways I hadn't before. The letter had sparked something in me, a desire to know more about my mom, to understand the woman she was and the choices she had made. Emma became a bridge to that past, sharing stories and memories that I had never heard before. There were still moments of awkwardness, moments when the weight of everything that had happened threatened to pull us apart. But there was also a newfound sense of honesty between us, a willingness to face the hard truths instead of hiding from them. It wasn't easy, but it felt real. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Emma turned to me. "Your mom would be so proud of you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You're everything she hoped you'd be." Her words brought a lump to my throat, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was ours to shape. In the weeks that followed, the house slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, or at least a new version of it. The tension that had once loomed over every interaction began to fade, replaced by something softer, something more honest. For the first time in a long time, we started to feel like a family. Not a perfect one, but one that could endure the cracks and flaws. The letter from my mom became a turning point for all of us. For me, it was a reminder of her unwavering love and belief in me, a thread of hope tying me to the past while urging me forward. For Emma, it became a way to connect with me on a deeper level. She shared stories of my mom, memories that brought tears to our eyes and laughter to our lips. It wasn't easy to hear at first, it hurt to remember all that I'd lost, but it also healed something I hadn't realized was broken. One afternoon, Emma handed me an old photo album I'd never seen before. "Your mom gave this to me," she said quietly. "She asked me to hold on to it until you were ready." As I flipped through the pages, I saw a side of my mom I hadn't known, a young woman full of life, love, and dreams. Each photo felt like a glimpse into a world I had only ever imagined, and for the first time, I felt truly connected to her memory. My relationship with Emma transformed in ways I couldn't have predicted. She went from being a polite but distant figure in my life to someone I could trust, someone I could rely on. It didn't happen overnight, and there were still moments of awkwardness, but the walls between us were coming down. I started to see her not just as my stepmom, but as a person, a woman who had her own struggles, her own fears, and her own regrets. My dad, too, found a way to move forward. The revelation about the letter and the refinancing of the house had shaken him, but it also brought a new sense of openness to our family. He and Emma began to have deeper conversations, addressing things they had once swept under the rug. Their relationship grew stronger, built on a foundation of shared honesty and understanding. As for me, I carried my mom's letter with me everywhere. It became a source of strength, a reminder that I could face whatever challenges life threw my way. Her words echoed in my mind whenever I felt lost or uncertain, guiding me back to the person she believed I could be. Looking back, I realized that the secrets Emma had kept weren't born out of malice or deceit, but out of fear and love. She had made mistakes, big ones, but she had also done her best in a situation that was far from easy. In the end, it wasn't her secrecy that defined her, but her willingness to face the consequences and make amends. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that trust is fragile but not irreparable. It can be rebuilt piece by piece if both sides are willing to put in the effort. I also learned that love in all its forms is complicated. It's messy, imperfect, and sometimes painful, but it's also what holds us together when everything else falls apart. As I sat in my room one evening, reading my mom's letter for what felt like the 100th time, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Not just for her, but for Emma and my dad as well. They weren't perfect, but they were mine. And together, we were learning how to be a family, one truth at a time. If you were in this situation, what would you have done? Would you have confronted Emma earlier, or waited for her to reveal the truth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, ones that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Stay tuned, because the next story will shock you even more.